All right, folks, we're going to take a look at the exercises for the Hiphil stem or Hiphil pattern. We've got 4 lessons worth of exercises here, so we'll go relatively quickly, but again, I'm just going to point out to you the diagnostics, the clues that you should be picking up on in order to tell you what the Hiphil is here. So looking at lesson 31, starting with exercise A, as we go through here, you'll see that there are 2 primary clues. It's going to differ depending on the pattern and the conjugation, but the Hiphil is often going to have 2 primary clues that you're in the Hiphil. So what we see number 1 here, the primary clues we see are the heroic yod infix. This is you could call it the theme vowel, the R2 vowel. You've got a heroic yod here that's characteristic of the Hiphil. You've also got the hey heroic prefix. All right, so these 2 diagnostics, these 2 clues, these are going to appear on the perfect conjugation in the Hiphil. All right, so we've got a Hiphil perfect. The shuric suffix of the suffix conjugation tells us 3CP. So we've got a Hiphil perfect 3CP from kaos. Number 2 here, you'll notice a slight difference. We've got a heroic yod infix, theme vowel, R2 vowel. We've got a hey patach prefix. So this is a little bit different. In the perfect, your prefix is going to be hey heroic, or basically a hey with a E/I class vowel, usually heroic. And in the imperfect side of the family, not just the imperfect conjugation, but those built on the imperfect, so it's going to be the infinitive, the imperative, the jussive. On that side, you're going to have a hey with a patach, or if you've got a prefix conjugation like the imperfect, the prefix will cover that hey, and you'll just have the patach there. But this IE class vowel versus the A class vowel, this is going to be a really strong determiner between whether you're in a perfect conjugation or you're in the imperfect family. So because of the hey patach, we know we're on the imperfect side of the family. There's no prefix letter covering the hey. That means that in this situation, we're on the imperfect family, but we're in a conjugation that doesn't use a prefix, like an infinitive or an imperative. And so what we've got here, this is actually going to be the Hiphil imperative. The shuric tells us this is an imperative to MP. If this were infinitive construct, we wouldn't see that shuric on there. Moving on to number 3 here. Again, we see the heroic yod infix, hey patach. So again, this is another imperfect side of the family, but this would be a good example of the infinitive here, or it could be the imperative to MS. And actually, I'm going to go up here because there's actually a couple of these that can be a little bit tricky. Let's look at the difference here. In the imperative, you're actually going to get the sere vowel. You're going to get that in the imperative and in the infinitive absolute. So in the Hiphil, that it's almost the opposite of what I would expect. In the infinitive construct, I would expect that vowel to contract into the sere, but just remember that the infinitive, and again, I guess I'm trying to think of a mnemonic here that'll help you keep these distinct. Maybe you could say the imperative has the sere. That might be a way to keep it in mind. The imperative has the sere. And then also remember that the infinitive construct and the infinitive absolute have to have some way of distinguishing each other. And so the infinitive absolute looks like the imperative here. But it can be tricky here because this heroic yod that you get, this is in the imperative going to go to a sere in the 2ms form, and in the 2FP form. Now, when you're in the 2FS and the 2MP forms, these two forms that have the vocalic suffix, you do get that heroic yod back, but you'll also have a suffix that makes it obvious that it's imperative rather than infinitive. So whenever you see the shurik, you know it's imperative. You could get a little trouble here with the 2FS form because this looks like the infinitive with a heroic yod added, and you might get a heroic yod added if you have a 1CS suffix on your infinitive. But in that situation, the difference between an infinitive construct in the Hiphil with a 1CS suffix and an I shouldn't say, and an imperative, sorry, the difference between an infinitive construct 1CS in the Hiphil and an imperative 2FS in the Hiphil is going to be obvious from context. One of those is going to make more sense than the other. So that's how you would end up telling those apart. So do recognize that shift in the theme vowel, that it can be tricky. So with that shift, we know that this then indicates, because there is no suffix, that we've got the infinitive construct of the Hiphil here. This is not imperative, because if it were imperative 2MS, this would shift to the sere. All right? So looking through all of these, you can see that. We've got number 4, heroic yod, patach. This tells us that we're in the imperfect side of the family. Number 5, heroic yod. Here we've got another heroic yod mem, so this is likely a participle. That participle is confirmed by the mem prefix with the patach. Again, patach prefix vowel. So this is going to be a Hiphil participle, and this is masculine plural. Number 6, we don't have the heroic yod here, but remember in the perfect, that heroic yod only shows up in the third person. All right, so if we go back up here into the perfect conjugation, that heroic yod shows up in the 3MS and the 3FS. In the 2MS, the 2FS, and the 1CS. In all of these, it's the patach. Same for the plural. 3CP has the heroic yod, 2MP, 2FP, and 1CP, those go to the patach. All right, so that's why, that's why, even though this is Hiphil, you don't get the heroic yod infix here, because that only occurs in the perfect in the third person. But we still have the hey heroic prefix to indicate that we've got a Hiphil perfect. All right, and then the tem suffix obviously is 2MP. Number 7, heroic yod infix, patach prefix vowel. Number 8, we've got a sere theme vowel here instead of the heroic yod. And this is going to be indicative of a jussive. All right, so both in the infinitive, I'm sorry, not the infinitive, both in the imperative form and in the jussive form, you get this contraction of the heroic yod to a sere. And so that's one of the things that we have to remember is you'll learn this next lesson, of course it's this week as well, but there are certain forms of the Hiphil that are going to be quote-unquote shortened. All right, so the Hiphil will be shortened in the jussive. The Hiphil will be shortened in, well, we'll get to those others when we arrive. But just understand that's what's going on here is you've got this shortened, this heroic yod is shortened to a sere. And I shouldn't say shortened because sere isn't short, but it's contracted to a sere there. Here you've also got the vav relative. So this is a vayiktol form, but instead of vayiktol, it would be the vaitiktol. This is the either 3F. Oh no, actually we know that this isn't 3FS, even though it's got a tav with no suffix. We know it's not a 3FS because we don't know. They would be the same. So here in this particular form, it's either 3FS or 2MS. Then number 9 here, we've got a mem patach prefix. That is a very good indication of a Hiphil participle. We don't have really a suffix, but we get the segel, segel, tav pattern in a participle. That's going to indicate feminine singular. And then number 10, again, we've got the hey heric prefix. There's no heric yod infix, but that's because we're in the perfect in the first common singular. And in the perfect, the Hiphil only has the heric yod in the third person. All right, so that is section A. Let me check what the next part is. We're going to go A to E. All right, so let's look at E here. All right, so we'll just take number 4 here as the longest one. We've got bis 8. So again, I'm expecting a verb here because I see a bait I see a bait on the front. I'm automatically thinking in my mind that this might be some sort of infinitive with the bait preposition because I'm thinking verb here. All right, so if that's the case, what verb am I looking at? If I take the bait off as a preposition, I'm left with sen aleph tav. Now, is sen aleph tav a root that I'm familiar with? I can't think of one off the top of my head. Let's look here. Sen aleph lamed. Actually, that's shin. Sen aleph tav is not one that we've learned. And so that can't be the root. So what are our other options? Getting back here. Well, is sin ever added as a prefix? No. So sin is probably part of the root. Aleph as well. What about tav? Is tav ever added as a suffix? There's lots of times when tav is added as a suffix. The problem is we have to figure out, well, let's just go through the times when tav is added as a suffix. Obviously in the perfect, but in the perfect we don't really lose any R1 letters, so we would have to be losing a hey here, sha'ah, and in that case, if we add a tav suffix, we would expect a heric yod, which we don't get. So perfect doesn't make sense. What about in the imperfect? We don't really have any suffixes in the imperfect that begin with a tav. What about the imperative? Imperative doesn't have tav as a suffix. What about infinitive? Well, there are two situations where the infinitive construct would have a tav suffix. In the third hey, we would have a holem vav tav, which we don't have here. But in one yod vav, and in, no, I'm sorry. Yes, in one yod vav, we would have a segel segel tav, and in some one noons, we would see a segel segel tav, depending on what verb it is. So we don't have a segel segel tav here, but what we do have is this sere on an aleph. And so what happens here is because the aleph quiesces when it closes a syllable, it can't close the previous syllable, so that segel is going to drop off, and then this one gets lengthened to the sere to compensate. And so here, what we've got is an infinitive construct of either a one yod or a one noon. Now the one yod, yasa, that also does not sound familiar to me. Let's double check it. Yod sin. Yeah, the only thing we get with yod sin, it looks like, is yarash. So it must be a one noon. Now nasa, that is a word that we've learned. Nasa is to carry, to take up, to lift up, to bear, something like that. So So if this is infinitive construct with a bait, we've either got an infinitive of means or an infinitive of time, so a temporal infinitive. Excuse me. So we'll have to decide how to translate that once we get more context. But right now we've got to take or to lift up or to bear, to carry, something like that. Then we've got hasar, so the ruler or the prince. And then we've got a definite direct object marker. And it's most likely, since we don't get a verb until over here and it's a Viactol form, it's most likely that this is the direct object of the infinitive here. So if this is the direct object of the infinitive, it would be something like to take. Matto is going to be, this is probably a form that you aren't going to recognize. We've lost an aleph here. When we add the holem vav suffix for his, that possessive suffix, we lose the aleph. Mateh is going to be the word for staff, so this is his staff. So to take up or to lift up his staff, hasar is probably the subject then of this infinitive. So the prince to take up his staff. That doesn't make sense in English, but luckily this bait preposition here tells us that we should probably translate this infinitive as a dependent clause. So either by taking up his staff or by lifting up his staff, but we also have to get the ruler or the prince in here. So it could either be by lifting up his staff, and then we've got al rosho, over his head. By lifting up his staff over his head, there's no room for the subject here if it's instrumental. So let's try the temporal. When lifting up his staff over his head, or when the prince or the ruler lifted up his staff over his head, they arose. Who is they? All the men arose. So when the prince lifted up his staff over his head, all the men arose, and they stood. This is Viactol form 3MP. Here it could be a little bit tricky. You've got this patach prefix letter. This is not Hiphil. The patach prefix letter occurs in the Hiphil of the imperfect or jussive, but it also occurs in the cal of certain one gutturals. Okay, the fact that this is a guttural is what commands a patach here. Gutturals prefer A-class vowels. So that's why you get a yod patach instead of a yod hirik. But this is still cal. So the men arose and they stood. Lefanav is before him or in his presence. And he said, so again, third person, we're looking for a subject, but we may not get one. It may just be he said. Here we've got a preposition. This almost looks like Elohim, but it's not Elohim, it's Alehem. So this is El, the preposition, to, and then it takes that type 2 suffix that you usually see on plural nouns. Ahem is to them. And he said to them, Sa'u. All right, so Sa'u is basically going to be this is an imperative 2MP form of yatsa. Remember, the yod is going to drop off. The one yod vav is going to drop off of the imperative form of ts'u, of yatsa here. So we get yatsa means he came out, or he went out, or came forth. As an imperative, it means come forth or go out. And as a 2MP, it's directed toward all the men. So he said to them, go out or come out. La milchama. Lamed preposition, definite article, patach dagesh, to the milchama, to the battle. And al tir'u. Al is a negative particle. Tir'u is an imperfect form of yareh. But remember, Hebrew does not negate. It doesn't issue a prohibition by negating the imperative. It issues a prohibition by negating the imperfect. So even though you could translate this literally as you will not be afraid, it has the force of an imperative as a command. You will not be afraid. Do not be afraid. So he's saying, go out to the battle and do not be afraid. Key. Why should they not be afraid? What's the reason? What's the explanation for them not being afraid? Ki Adonai imachem. Adonai is with you all. All right, so when the prince lifted, or in the prince's lifting of his staff over his head, when the prince lifted his staff over his head, all the men arose and they stood before him. And he said to them, go out to the battle and do not be afraid, because Adonai, the Lord, Yahweh, is with you. All right, so that is 31. Let's take a look at 32. Here we're dealing with one noons and one gutturals in the Hiphil practice. There we go. All right, so same thing. I'm just going to point out to you the Hiphil signs that you should see as we go down these. You know, you'll be able to figure out the conjugation, well, at least the person, gender, and number of each of these the same way you normally would. So I'm just going to focus on the Hiphil aspects. So number one here, we see the Hirik Yod, and we see a Hey Segel prefix. Now remember, in the perfect, the Hiphil prefix is an E/I class vowel. So it's not Hey Hirik here, it's Hey Segel, but it's still an EI vowel, okay? So perfect is EI vowels, imperfect is A vowels in the prefix. So Hirik Yod plus Hey EI vowel, that gives us the perfect conjugation. Hiphil perfect of Amon and I got thrown off because of the new suffix. I was thinking 1CP, but noon is part of the root here, and so this is of Amon, and it's just got a shurik suffix, so that means it's 3CP. All right. Number two, we see the Hirik Yod infix. We see the patach prefix vowel. So this is going to be, and we've got a prefix letter. So this is going to be imperfect. Aleph tells us it's 1CS. Excuse me. Number three, we've got a Hirik Yod infix. We've got a patach prefix vowel. So again, because we've got a prefix letter, it's not just a hey, we've got a prefix letter. That tells us we've got a Hiphil imperfect. The root here is going to be nagad. The noon has assimilated into the gimel. Number 4, we've got a hirik infix. We've got a patak prefix vowel, but we've got a hey over that patak. So this is going to be the imperfect family, but it's going to be one of the conjugations that does not have a prefix. So we should be thinking imperfect infinitive, one of those two. When we look at the shurik here, we can see that this is indicative of an imperative. Now, we talked before about how the imperative does not do the hirik yod, it does the sere. So what's going on here? Well, it only does the sere in the 2ms form and the 2fp form. In the 2fs and the 2mp, I think I got all those right. Basically, the top form and the bottom form go into sere. The one that has no suffix goes to sere, and the one that has the na suffix goes to sere. So that's the 2ms and the 2fp go to sere in the imperative hiphil. But when you have the vocalic suffixes, so the shurik or the hirik yod, that's the here, the 2mp or the hirik would go on the 2fs, those you maintain the hirik yod. All right, and I believe it's accented on the hirik yod. So this would be hagidu. And again, the noon has assimilated into the gimel. Here, number 5, we've got something very similar, but we've got the hirik prefix vowel, the IE prefix vowel. This is going to indicate the perfect conjugation. Again, same root, nagad, but the noon has assimilated into the gimel. Here, the shurik indicates 3CP. Number 6, we've got the hirik yod infix. We've got a patak prefix vowel, but we have to be careful because one of the reasons we have a patak prefix vowel might be this one guttural, okay? So why would we, if this were cal and the patak prefix were explained by the one guttural, why on earth would we have a hirik yod theme vowel here? Shouldn't this be either a holum or a patak in the cal? Well, it should. So here, even though we can't rely on the patak prefix because there may be a second explanation for it, we can rely on the hirik yod here. So this is going to be a hiphil imperfect. Noon indicates 1CP form of charash. Number 7 here, we've got a hirik yod infix. We've got a patak prefix with no prefix letter. It's just the hey. So that, again, we're thinking imperative or infinitive, the imperfect family that doesn't have a prefix. Because we have no suffix, the imperative would be sere instead of hirik yod. So this must be the infinitive construct form. This is hiphil infinitive construct from Aman. Number 8, very similar. We've got the hirik yod infix, but we've got the segel, hey segel prefix. So remember, EI prefix is going to be perfect. Patak prefix is going to be imperfect family. All right, so here we've got a hiphil perfect, and it is going to be 3ms because there's no suffix. Number 9, we have no hirik yod infix. We do have a sere, and we have a patak prefix with no prefix letter. It's just the hey. So this tells me I'm on the imperfect family, but I need a conjugation that has no prefix letter, so I'm thinking infinitive construct or imperative. Infinitive construct is going to have the hirik yod here, but the imperative 2ms or the infinitive absolute will have the sere. So it's either hiphil imperative 2ms from charash, or it's hiphil infinitive absolute from charash. Number 10 here, we've got sail. Excuse me. Here, this one can be really tricky. You've only got 3 letters. You do have a dagesh, so be careful because there's lots of possibilities here. If let's just go through what all the possibilities are. So let's ask ourselves, how many root letters is a Hebrew verb supposed to have? 3. How many do I have? I have 3. This might be my root. All right, so if this is my root, how do I explain what all's going on here? Well, if Yod Sade Lamed is my root, I've got a Dagesh in R2, I've got a Patak in R1, and a Sere in R2. That looks a lot like the non-prefixed version of the PL imperfect family, which basically means a PL infinitive or a PL imperative. A PL infinitive construct or a PL imperative 2MS of Yatzal would explain this. But what does Yatzal mean? Well, let's go look it up. Yod Sade, Yod Sade, Yod Sade Aleph. We need Yod Sade Lamed. Yod Sale Kof. Oh, there is no Yod Sade Lamed. So Yatzal can't be my root. Right? That's why this is tricky, is because when you look at it, here we go. All of these parts make sense as a PL infinitive construct or PL imperative 2MS, but Yatzal isn't a Hebrew root that we've learned. So that can't be our root. So what are the other possibilities? Well, is Lamed ever added as a suffix? No, not really. Is Yod ever added as a prefix? Yeah, this might be a prefix Yod. Okay, well, if this is a prefix Yod, then we have a patak in the prefix which says Hiphil instead of PL. Remember, we thought this was PL if Yod was R1. But here, if Yod is prefix, then the patak in the prefix indicates a Hiphil. Hiphil imperfect, to be exact, or Hiphil jussive, maybe. So what then is R1? Is it Sade? Well, Sade has a Dagesh. Now, if you've got a patak in your prefix, you're pretty sure you've got a Hiphil. If you've got a Dagesh in R1, there's no reason to have a Dagesh in R1. Nothing needs to assimilate here. Nothing needs to double here in R1. Well, into R1. But if we have an R1 noon, that would assimilate into R2. So what we've got here is a Yod Patak prefix on a one noon verb, noon sade lamed. So this is Natsal. Natsal in the Hiphil. So we've got a Hiphil imperfect. Actually, this is going to be a Hiphil jussive. So how do I know it's jussive instead of imperfect? Well, if this were a Hiphil imperfect 3MS form of Natsal, we would have the Hirik Yod. So why don't we have it? Well, because this is a jussive, not an imperfect. The jussive prefers the sere instead of the Hirik Yod. So what you've got here in number 10 is a Hiphil jussive 3MS form of Natsal. Number 11, very similar. All we've done is added a Vav Patak to the front and then put a Dagesh in the Yod. So this is the same thing. This is just adding the Vav relative to it. So this is going to be the Hiphil jussive. You might call this the Hiphil Vav relative or the Hiphil Vayiktol form or whatever. But remember, the Vav relative doesn't actually go on the imperfect. It goes on the jussive. And that's why you see the shortening here. All right, so all that to say, and I shouldn't say it goes on the jussive, because jussive speaks to function as much as it speaks to form. It goes on a form that looks identical to the jussive is probably the best way to say that. But again, same root, same conjugation, just adding the Vav relative. Number 12, we've got a Hey Hirik prefix. We don't have a Hirik Yod, though, but that's okay, because Hey Hirik indicates the Hiphil perfect, and the Hiphil perfect has a Hirik Yod only in the third person. We can see here that the tem suffix is not third person, this is 2MP. So we've got we've got a Hiphil perfect 2MP form of nabat. Again, the noon has assimilated into R2 here. All right, number 13. Here we've got a mem patak prefix. That's a very good indication that we're looking at a Hiphil participle. We've also got the hirik yod. This is going to be a Hiphil participle, masculine singular because there's no suffix from amon. Number 14, we've got the sere, no hirik yod, but a sere, and then we've got a patak prefix letter with a yod. This is very similar to something we saw. I mean, this is the same word, I think, that we saw in lesson 31. So again, if this were imperfect 3ms, we would expect to see yacharish, hirik yod. But because this is yacharish with the sere, this is going to be Hiphil jussive 3ms from charash. Number 5, we've got the hirik yod infix and the hirik yod mem suffix. So this is indicative of a Hiphil participle, and then of course the mem patak prefix confirms that we have a Hiphil participle. That Hiphil participle is added to nabat. When you add the prefix to a 1 noon, it assimilates into R2. So mabitim is going to be the Hiphil participle masculine plural form of nabat. All right, let me check the workbook again, or the worksheet. So 32 we do A and then D. All right, so let's look at D here. All right, let's just do number 3. So again, I'm expecting a verb. I see something that begins with a letter that could be a preposition. So I'm automatically thinking this is probably an infinitive. All right, so in addition to that, I do see a root here. I won't always see the root plainly like this, but here, mem tzade aleph, that's a root that I recognize. So I can explain the kaf as a bait preposition prefix. I can explain the kametz mem as a 3MP suffix. So I've explained every part of this. Remember, the infinitives, when you add a suffix to them like this, the O-class theme vowel is going to jump back here to R1. This is not a kametz. This is a kametz chatuf. And that's normal for an infinitive with a suffix on it. All right, so we've got matzah. Matzah means he found, he searched for, something like that. We've got a 3MP suffix, which is either going to indicate the subject of searched for or the object of searched for. So it could be they searched for, or it could be someone searched for them. But then we've got the definite direct object marker here. So is going to be the subject, not the object. So kaf is usually a temporal preposition on an infinitive. So this is going to mean as they were searching, or as they were looking for him, as they were searching for him, as they were looking for, not him, ha'ish, the man, as they were looking for the man, ha-rasha. Now this one could be tricky if you're thinking, verb here, but this is not a verb. This is definite article on rasha, and hopefully you recognize rasha as an adjective. As they were looking for the man, the wicked one, so the wicked man, bekerev. Bekerev. Bekerev is actually it's not two prepositions. It's a preposition, and then kerev is, it's kind of like a preposition. It's a noun. It means like the inward part the inside. So it doesn't mean inside, it means the inside, the place inside. That's why it's kind of like two prepositions, but this is actually going to be in construct with ha-machana, the camp. So as they were searching for the man, the wicked one, in the inside of the camp, which basically Futato has translated as within the camp, yikhu. So anytime you see kof and chet together in a verbal root, think lakach. All right, so took, they took. This is lakach. The lamed assimilates into the kof here. This is a cow, vav relative, because we've got a hirik here. It's 3CP, or 3MP rather. So as they were searching for the wicked man in or within the camp, they took him to... search for. This is actually, in this context, going to be find. So matzah can mean look for, search for, or it can mean find. So as they found, or when they found, the wicked man within the camp, they took him, this is the definite direct object marker with the 3ms suffix, so took him to ha-zachenim, to the elders, who, I presume that asher refers to the elders, or that, shaftu here, this is going to be a perfect 3CP of shafat, so they judged, the elders who judged him. When they found the wicked man within the camp, they took him to the elders who judged him, and he returned or turned away from or repented from sin from his sin. All right, so when they found the wicked man within the camp, they took him to the elders who judged him, and he repented or he turned from his sin. All right, that is 32. 33, we're going to do A and E. All right, so let's look here at A and E. Remember the the idea here of the one yod. We've got a true one yod and a one yod vav. The idea of the one yod is that the yod is either going to become part of the prefix vowel, that's the case of a true one yod, or the yod is going to transform back into the vav. That's the one yod vav. All right, now this transformation into the yod is one of the distinctives of the Hiphil, but we're still going to get this hirik yod infix often. All right, so we can see this hirik yod infix all the way down to number 6. Number 6 doesn't have it, but it does have a hey prefix, and that hey prefix indicates Hiphil. Other than that, this just looks like a perfect, okay? So you don't have the same clue in the one yods of a Hiphil perfect because, again, we talked about how Hiphils in the imperfect family have an A class vowel in the prefix. Hiphils in the perfect family have an EI class vowel. Well, here it doesn't have either. This is because the one yod turns into a vav. That makes it, the vav just isn't going to take a hirik or a sere. It's going to take a holum. And so that's why you don't get the help here. but tem is obviously a perfect suffix. So it should be pretty easy to see that this is a Hiphil perfect. Remember, this holum, vav, is just the yod reverting back to its vav form. You could think of the yod as growing a leg and becoming a vav again. So when you see this holum vav, you should be thinking yod here. This is just one of the things that a one yod vav does in the Hiphil. All right, so we've got here, all of these indicate Hiphil. The sere yod indicates that the what did I want to say about this? The sere yod. There was something I wanted to say about the sere yod, and I can't remember now. Basically, the question becomes: Is this a perfect 3ms, or is this maybe like a infinitive construct? Okay, so infinitive construct will have the heric yod. We're used to seeing a patak for the infinitive construct, but what does this one yod vav do there? So let's go back up and look at our paradigm here. Yeah, we want the true one yod, actually. All right. So where did our infinitive construct go? Oh, here we are. Okay, so here you can see that the infinitive construct, even though it's in the imperfect family, the one yod, again, it wants to be part of this prefix vowel, and patak yod just, that's not a vowel, that's a diphthong, and so that's why we don't get the patak here. But you can see that what ends up happening is the one yod perfect 3ms, hey tiv, ends up looking identical to the one yod infinitive construct, hey tiv. So how do you tell the difference between them? Well, the forms are identical, so the only way you're going to know the difference is context. All right, but still, in the infinitive absolute and in the imperative, the imperative 2ms and the imperative 2fp, these top and bottom forms of the one yod, you've still got the sere here, okay? So you can still distinguish those from the infinitive construct, but you are going to have a harder time now distinguishing the infinitive construct from the one yod Hiphil perfect. And again, the reason for that is when it wasn't a one yod, you could tell the difference because the perfect had an I class vowel and the infinitive construct had an A class vowel. But when you've got a one yod yod, the yod wants to be part of the prefix vowel. And heric, well, I guess heric would work. I can't actually explain why this goes to sere yod instead of heric yod. Because you would think that heric yod would make good sense to distinguish it from this situation. But either way, I guess what you need to know is that these two forms are going to be identical. And so when we get down here, we can call this perfect 3ms in the Hiphil, or we can call this Hiphil infinitive construct of yatav. This is a true one yod root, but we can't distinguish between them without context. This next one here, hoshiv, excuse me, same, similar kind of thing going on. Go up here to we were looking at the one yod, right? Yeah, this was the one yod. Looking now at the one yod vav, we've got hoshiv. We go into the infinitive construct and we've got hoshiv. Okay? So again, in these one yods, you're not going to be able to tell the difference between a perfect 3ms and an infinitive construct. Now, for yoshiv, we can, because the yod has covered up the hey. This is a prefix letter. We know this is imperfect. We know it's imperfect and not jussive because jussive would be a sere here. So we know that this is a Hiphil imperfect 3ms form of yeshav. Number 4, again, we know this is imperfect because we've got an imperfect vowel, the yod. So this is going to be a Hiphil imperfect 3ms form of yatav. Number 5, we know that this is a participle. This is a Hiphil participle because of the mem. Hiphil participle masculine plural form of yalad. Number 6, here we know it's perfect. Up here, we didn't know whether it was perfect or infinitive by the ho prefix, he, holem vav prefix. But now that we've got a perfect suffix added, we do know. Plus, in the second person, we lose the heric yod. So that's another reason we know this is perfect instead of infinitive construct. Number 7, here we know this is imperfect, Hiphil imperfect, because we've got the tav prefix plus the heric yod. This is going to be a 2MP form of the Hiphil imperfect of yatav. Number 8, we've got a vav relative on the front. So this is going to be, you could say, vav relative or vayiktol form of yeshav, 1CP. To be very precise, this is technically the vav relative plus the Hiphil jussive 1CP form of yeshav. All right, number 9. This one's a little bit tricky because it could go 2 ways. But we've got Hosea here. Actually, I don't think it is that tricky. Is it? Yes, it is. It can go 2 ways, I'm pretty sure. I'm pretty sure this could be either the Hiphil imperative 2ms form of yeshav or the Hiphil infinitive absolute. Let's go check that. So again, this is a 1 yod vav. What was the form? Hosea. All right, infinitive, 1 yod vav infinitive absolute is going to have the holem vav with the sere, and then 1 yod vav imperative 2ms is going to have the holem vav with the sere. The reason why we get that patach on the end is this is a furtive patach, which is going to get inserted when you have a third guttural here. All right, and then number 10 is going to be Hoshivi. So this one we know is an imperative. It's not perfect because in the perfect, well, okay. There's a chance this could be perfect if the heric yod were like an object suffix, maybe. But we won't get to that until lesson 35 here. In this case, what we've learned so far, this heric yod is actually the 2fs suffix for the imperative. So this is imperative 2fs. Remember, the imperative 2fs retains the heric yod. All right, and so we've got, what is this, lesson 33? So we've got A, then E. All right, translation. I'm going to go ahead and jump to lesson 34 because I've only got 5 minutes before my next conference. And I've already worked through a couple translations, so I'd basically be doing the same thing. So just apply what I did back there to these. You've got the answers in front of you. Let's look at 34. We're going to do A, B, and E. So let's take a look at that. 34A. So again, same thing as before. Heric yod, hey heric. This is perfect. The tav kametz indicates 2MP. Galah. That's tricky actually. So galah, when you add the consonantal suffix, is going to shift to heric yod anyways. But we're not going to have 2 heric yods in a row. So, we only need 1 there. So I'd actually not be certain that this was Hiphil, because this Hirik Yod may not be a Hiphil Hirik Yod, it may just be the third Hey with a consonantal suffix Hirik Yod. But the fact that I've got a Hey Hirik on the front, that tells me this is Hiphil. So Hiphil perfect, 2ms of Galah. Number 2, I've got a Hey Patak prefix. Now that has been shortened because I've got my accent way over here. So this is now pro-pretonic. So this is the Hiphil Patak. No, it's not Hiphil Patak prefix. Because this ta suffix, this is clearly a perfect suffix. So here we get the chemo. This O here, this is just kind of a connecting vowel that the Hiphil puts on hollow verbs. So you get the Hirik Yod where you would usually see the shurik or the holam vav. The Hiphil is going to impose a Hirik Yod on these hollow verbs. And of course, the prefix is going to reduce here because it's pro-pretonic. It can't actually hold a short vowel. It has to have a reduced vowel. But it is interesting to me that it shifts to Hatef Patak rather than Hatef Segel. Let's take a look at that chart. Hollow perfect. Right. There we go. Yeah, so even in the perfect, you get the E/I class in the hollow perfect even. Let me see what this note says. Probably there for a reason, right? Maybe it's not there for a reason. I'm sure that's the note I left. It seems familiar to me, but anyway. So as we get down here, yeah, I'm not sure why it goes with the Hatef Patak rather than the Hatef Segel. Man, that would be convenient if it was Segel, because you could still say it's an EI class vowel. But that's just something you have to realize. Fortunately, it only shifts to that in situations where you're obviously going to have a perfect suffix. Now, I'll grant you, this isn't obviously a perfect suffix. You know, it's still that holam vav connecting vowel, and then the tav shava 2fs suffix. Of course, you don't need the shava when it's preceded by a vowel here, but anyways, it's it should be easy to tell that it's perfect. All right, so let's keep going here because I'm actually out of time. So number 3, again, Hirik Yod, E-class vowel, that's going to be perfect. Hirik Yod, this is, and this one's a little bit tricky because you've actually got, it's not a patak, that's important to realize here. What you've got is, because it's a hollow verb, you're going to need a full vowel in the prefix. And so you know this is perfect because you've got a Yod prefix. So this is Hiphil, imperfect, 3MP, but you've got the kametz here because it's hollow. All right. I've already, like I said, I've gone through these with you. B, what was the other one? D, or make sure I don't leave out anything new. Activity E. All right, let's go through these because this is sort of the hodgepodge. This is the mixed bag. It's going to have everything in it. All right, so number 1, we've got the Hirik Yod infix, and we've got the Yod becoming a Vav. So that's going to be, and we've got a Yod prefix. The prefix tells us we're in the imperfect. Hiphil imperfect 3ms form of Yahrad. Number 2, we don't have any Hirik Yod. In fact, we've got a prefix Yod with a Shavah. That tells us we've got a PL. Now that we know that, we can look at R1, see our Patak. R2 CR Dagesh. R2's vowel is not a sere, but that's because in the imperfect, third hey becomes segel hey. All right, so our root here is kasa, or kise, or kise. Number 3, we've got a perfect form. The ta suffix is perfect to ms. And we've got ba as our bow root. There's nothing here to indicate something other than cow. There's no... now, usually this is going to, in the perfect, we're going to see a patach. So you might think that the comments indicates that this isn't cow. But the problem is the bow here, the aleph. The aleph is what causes this to lengthen to the comments here. So I would call this cow perfect 2ms form of bow. But I'm just going to check myself on that because I'm not absolutely certain. So we're in 34E. All right, yeah, cow perfect 2ms form of bow. Okay. So, while I'm at it, I might as well just work through these with you quicker. I'll just point out what I see here. All right, so we saw that. Same for this one. We see holum sere. That's an indication of the cow participle. The kamets is added because of the third guttural here. But we don't see any reason to see anything other than cow. There's no other pattern modifications that would make us think something other than cow. Masculine singular because there's no suffix. Number 5, here we can see we've got a PL. We've got a PL perfect. We've got Hirik in R1, Dagesh in R2. This is a PL perfect 1CS. Number 6, here we've got this weird Natan verb. We've got a Yod Hirik prefix, which is cow, and then, so it's an imperfect form, and then the Shurik suffix is going to be 3NP. Number 7, we've got Yalad, but because it's a 1 Yod Vav in the cow, Yod's going to drop off and you're going to get the Sere pattern. So Yalad is going to be cow imperfect. There's either 3FS or 2MS of Yalad. And then number 8, again, if you see kof and chet together in a verb, it's lakach. Here, this would be that, because it behaves like a 1 noon, it's going to be that segel tav pattern, but the chet here changes those segels into patach. So infinitive construct there. All right, thanks for hanging with me. If you guys have any questions, let me know. Don't forget about your online connect. Hopefully you have a great weekend. We'll see you next time.